What does finding Frankie hide from the player in the intro of the game? Through Henry Hotline's chase. In Finding Frankie, you play the role of a very lucky contestant who's Willy Wonka'd his way into Frankie's parkour palace. Your golden ticket may have landed you in hot water though, since this park is not the wonderland you'd expected. Through high-octane parkour and platforming, you'll dive into this nightmarish facility in hopes of obtaining that sweet prize money. In this video, we'll be taking a look out of bounds in search of things we're not meant to see within this crazy park, like Frankie eating his own body in an event, and whatever the heck is happening to Henry. We'll also be breaking things as we go, like slipping out of the map completely by accident. There's lots to cover, so I hope you enjoy today's look behind the scenes of Finding Frankie. Now, to make sure we're all caught up on the game's flow of events, I'll hit you with a quick recap of what we'll be covering before each section. So as we start a new game, we first watch a video introducing us to the park, and more importantly, the prize money. You'll put on a Frankie costume before passing through the door ahead, and as the race begins, the entire operation comes unglued. The monstrous Frankie bursts through the door, making quick work of our adversaries as we make our escape. From here we can head to the tutorial area where we learn the game's mechanics, including vaulting, sliding, swinging on bars, and of course the rail grind. We then head back to the lobby, complete some circuit puzzles, and then expertly climb the Jumping with Frankie room, being careful not to step out of bounds or face the rabbit's wrath. We'll stop the recap here for now and head back to the start of the game. So the very first thing I wanted to check out was the character we play as, and in doing so, we'll see that the suit was incredibly redundant. We're already dressed as a rabbit, striped pants and bow tie included. We're technically missing the mask, but we also lack a head anyway, so it kinda cancels that out. As you can see when both are in view, the costume will simply vanish as we put it on, and the player remains unchanged. Something I found super funny though is the character's movement animations. When we're walking and jumping around, the player doesn't look quite right when viewed from a third-person perspective. Not to mention when we're walking backwards while crouching. It looks like that weird Squid Game animation as well, which I'll never be able to unsee. During regular gameplay, you'll never observe more than your arms and legs and a bit of your torso, so your body doesn't move a whole lot during these animations, and the result will never not be hilarious to me. This also foreshadows our parkour abilities, but we'll get to that in just a bit. As we head through the door to the starting line, we'll take a look at the other contestants to find a pretty haunting detail. If we clip the camera inside their heads, we'll find that each of them have a set of low-poly eyeballs floating just behind the mask. I first realized this when taking a look at the present model on the title screen, and it's definitely unsettling when viewed like this. I missed something here that I only realized at the start of the race though. The mask covers the majority of their face, so it would be nearly impossible to see the Frankie texture that's hidden on their face. It's especially creepy because Frankie's mouth is in the exact position the contestant's mouth would be, so I'm kinda glad this isn't visible. Now, directly ahead of us are three large metal doors, and as we know, Frankie will attack us from the one in the center. I wanted to see where the other doors lead, but was disappointed to find that each of them are properly modeled hallways, but do not lead anywhere at all, but instead come to a dead end just around the corner. As I'm sure you're all curious, if we look beyond the center door, we'll find a true spectacle awaiting us. Our terrifying friend Frankie T-posing his little heart out. At this point, the race has not yet started, so he spends his free time staring at the wall and eating the tutorial sign. When standing up straight, he's unnervingly massive, and as we'll see later, he can only get larger. As soon as we approach the starting line, Frankie begins asserting some real dominance on us, sliding towards the door without changing his pose. After getting close, he'll back up a bit, quickly swapping into his attack animation as the door opens. His head actually clips to the doorway in this sequence, which is something I never noticed because there was a giant killer bunny eating my friends. Speaking of which, as he feasts on the noggin of the early starter, he never actually loses his head. Instead, it shrinks down a bunch, retracting into the space his head used to occupy. When Frankie reaches out to grab the guy on our right, he'll voluntarily float into Frankie's hand as he reaches forward. An action we can't really see taking place due to how fast this cutscene is. What's worse is that there's no warning we were about to be jump scared, and it just sort of happens abruptly instead. Shockingly, this sequence made our monster grow, and I don't mean Frankie either. The contestant to our left is now massive for some reason, a growth that takes place instantly after he backs through the door at the start of this sequence. He warps into his spot again and is 3 times the size. I'm not certain why he grew 3 sizes that day, but it doesn't matter anyway, since we're currently being jump scared. Watching this take place in bullet time, we'll see that Frankie pulls back and gives us a good whop as the screen goes black, freezing in place as we're prompted to respawn. As we head into our first hallway here, I took a real quick look at the other side of the doors, but they don't lead anywhere at all. The same goes to the bathrooms up ahead, so I hope the contestants can hold it till they get home. If they get home? With that said, let's head into the parkour training course now. As I said earlier, we weren't quite finished viewing the player from another angle, and here we can highlight each action on its own. First, when vaulting over the fences, we'll tilt straight back and essentially run over the obstacle. We don't even use our hands for this move, and it almost looks like we changed our minds in the middle of a backflip. Next, we'll swing across the gap using the bar overhead, and this animation is similar to the previous in a way. We never hold the bar itself, but instead put our hands straight up like we're going to grab it, and then revert to a jumping pose directly after. If you don't let go, you'll just swing back and forth, still falling infinitely. While jumping across the wall trampolines, we just sort of aim our arm and leg in the direction we're jumping from and then leap away. I find it a bit funny how little effort our character puts into these jumps, like we never even had a try, we're just that good. When it's time to channel our inner Sonic adventure, we'll jump onto the rails leading across the room. From another angle, we quickly slide on top of the rail and enter this balancing pose, sliding across the rail as sparks fly in our wake. During a ride, our body can clip through the rails if the angle is too steep. And I realize you can spin freely on the rail as well. Despite these comedic animations at times, the game's movement is super snappy and satisfying to play. We just might look a bit silly to our monstrous adversaries. Now, after completing the next set of circuit puzzles, we'll arrive in a room where we have to climb to the very top to continue. If we step on the floor, however, things turn scary pretty quick. Frankie, feeling a bit like Boxy Boo today, drops down in a little box and springs to life. As Frankie first appears, a brief flicker of his T-posing model can be seen as the box lands on the ground. It's completely empty at the moment, since our springy friend currently occupies the void below the floor. He's looking a bit jumbled up at the moment though, and we can watch in slow-mo as he pops out into view. He then stretches his slinky legs incredibly far, checking the various platforms above for any rule breakers. If we're not hidden as this occurs, we'll be jump scared by the springy rabbit, and as he retracts, a separate model will be moved into the map. Unlike our first encounter, the jump scare here is a bit longer than the previous, and a lot more brutal as well. In this case, Frankie gives us a familiar hand to the face, and this time the scare continues as we're warped into his hand. We're hauled up for an agonizing moment, being slammed to the ground as he lifts his foot. It gets much worse though, and we get perfect cell stomped by Frankie's huge red shoe. Yet another protagonist you could have saved. Things get a bit weird at this point, since Frankie resets to his default pose, and the player becomes massive like the contestant we saw earlier. Both models are clipping through the wall and stay here until we respawn. After hardcore parkouring our way to the top, we'll reach the second floor and navigate this large room, completing another circuit puzzle so we can enter the vents down below. We'll make our way through a narrow hallway, climbing back into the vents where we encounter Frankie once more. A voice over the intercom calls him back, so we press on just to encounter him again behind an ironically painted wall. A chase ensues where time is our enemy, requiring the completion of circuits to escape the monster rabbits on our tail. Eventually we drop through a giant tube, dropping the player in the food court. Now heading back into the vents where we encounter Frankie, we can take a look atop the ladder to find our rabbit friend bunched up just out of sight. What's really freaky is that he's gone full Ouroboros on us. His massive jaws are currently devouring his own body, a sight I wasn't expecting when I flew up here. When the player climbs the ladder and hits the trigger, Frankie's giant mechanical hands reach out while his body unfurls, revealing the human hand he was carrying in his mouth. He then exits the vent, slingshotting his head away from his body into the empty space beyond the level. After a second, it instantly teleports back, and he resumes eating himself. You have fun with that, buddy. Unfortunately, his lunch break ended early, and up ahead, we'll find him T-posing behind the door he starts the chase from. As soon as the circuit is activated, he'll snap into his entry animation as the chase begins. I didn't run here though, but instead, let him catch me. When we're jump scared at this point in the game, we'll be warped into a small room placed outside the level where the animation can play out. By moving the player here during this animation, the developers don't have to worry about Frankie clipping through the small environments within the map. Now, when heading downstairs, the door slams behind us as Frankie forces it open with his bare hands. Watching from the other side of the door, we'll see that he remains in his running animation for a bit before swapping over to the lifting pose. He has terrible posture and is lifting with his back though, so luckily we have a bit of time to escape. He also drops down through the ceiling to cut us off up ahead, and watching this from up above, he'll sort of just blink into existence as the fence collapses underneath him. Speaking of teleportation, I warped behind Frankie to see what would happen during this chase. In doing so revealed that this was never technically a chase at all. Frankie is programmed to run from the start of the hallway in the direction of the player, and even though we're behind him, he continues on like we're not even there. We won't be caught in this instance, but an unfortunate side effect of cheating the monster rabbit is that the door closes behind him, meaning we're completely stuck now. Loading my checkpoint was the only way to proceed. Now, in the food court, we'll use the trampolines to open the door and head into Deputy Duck's parkour parkour room. Here we'll bounce and climb through various challenges, eventually reaching Deputy Duck's police station, and meeting the world's most suspicious duck. Up ahead we'll meet Henry Hotline, and using our new Ducktective friend, locate 5 phones hidden throughout the maze. This opens a gate in the safe room, allowing us to pull a switch and leave Henry's labyrinth. A chase then ensues, where we'll be pursued by both Henry and our good friend Frankie through the facility, eventually ending as you lock yourself in the bathroom. Now rewinding time, as we finish making our way through Deputy Duck's parkour room, we'll catch a glimpse of Frankie climbing past the one-way glass behind us. During this short scare, he'll climb upwards past the glass, clipping through a wall and a TV before exiting through the ceiling. His climbing animation continues for a while before freezing in place, and he remains here indefinitely. Now you may have noticed while looking outside the map that there are several objects floating around us. The assets seen occupying this void space are actually separate parts of the map that aren't currently loaded in, and only specific pieces of the map remain intact when the player leaves the area. That means the entirety of this game takes place in one map, and the separate sections dynamically load and unload as we advance the story. While taking a look out of bounds, I found a platform with text floating above it that reads, "Always loaded objects." Here we'll find a multitude of assets, including Deputy Duck, Henry Hotline, and some limbs, among others. Regardless of how far away from this platform the player gets, these objects will always remain loaded in case they need to be moved into the map. Back inside the police station, we can watch our first meeting with Deputy Duck from another perspective. He seems extremely suspicious of our presence, until he falls on his face, that is. We'll then pick him up, just to be pecked in the face relentlessly. I don't know what we did to deserve this, but I wouldn't dare question the beak of justice himself. When we unsheath Deputy Duck, he'll be warped from the platform I mentioned before to directly behind our leg. We can then use his flash or radar feature until we put him away, where he'll vanish in the same way he appeared. Something I find funny about our duck friend here is the way he rotates his head in a "we ducks can see everything" way. Now, with the lights on, we don't need Deputy Duck to guide us per se, but I did notice these vents seemed a bit familiar. This area with the overhead switch looks a lot like Mangle's vent repair minigame in FNAF Help Wanted, with the exception of a certain endoskeleton beneath our feet. On the other side of the vents, we arrive at connections with Henry Hotline, and looking beyond the doors, you'll see Henry is already waiting to greet us. As soon as we interact with the phone, Henry springs to life and gives us a good scolding, stepping back through the metal bars, Terminator style. He swings around, clipping through the wall, and then zips through the floor, this model staying out of sight for the rest of our time in the maze. After we've interacted with our first telephone, a second version of Henry that was previously kept under the map will begin his hunt. He's not exactly subtle though, and his footsteps sound more like angry stomping. When he spots the player, he'll run straight for them with a jump scare occurring if we're caught. As soon as he grabs us, the player's warped beneath the map, and Henry moves to the center of the maze, grabbing us by the neck and lifting us into the air. There is no head squishing today though, and the scare ends in this threatening pose. While finishing this area with the lights on, I found it a lot easier to navigate while avoiding Henry. But we've rendered Deputy Duck completely useless. His radar doesn't work if the game's post-processing effects are disabled, so I was completely on my own in search for the telephones. That being said, I managed to get through the level, and it was time to climb into the giant tube. Our arms are the only remaining part of our body as we climb inside, but at least we have our duck. As Henry makes his grand entrance behind us, he'll fly up through the floor, with his model freaking out as it twists around. After this terrifying breakdance is over, he reaches through the tunnel to grab us, pulling our legs out from the void. The player's arms aren't visible at this point in the cutscene, so they're moved on top of the slide as we kick Henry in his drawn-on face. As we're running from Henry in this chase, we'll jump over Frankie, who appears from within this dark pit. Watching this from below, we can see that he's placed down and out of sight as his legs stretch upward, rising Frankie up into view as we pass over top of him. At this point, Henry stopped in front of the trampoline we just bounced off of, and a second Henry appeared from behind the metal door on the other side. After escaping Henry, we'll pass through the bathroom and climb into a vent, dropping us into a game called Frankie's Crash Course. Waves of barriers and objects will pass by, attempting to push us into the saw blades on the other side. The barriers load in just out of the player's sight, passing by and stopping just in front of the saw blades, where they'll unload out of our line of sight. You'd think the saw blades were the most dangerous thing here, but oh no, it was the bug I encountered while avoiding them. With 8 seconds on the clock, I slid across the floor and managed to clip outside the floor's collider, sending me falling into the hole before the area down below could load in. I was able to run around on the bits of floor that extended beyond the map's walls, and I believe this area we've loaded into is the incinerator, which we'll be exploring a bit later on. After running around out of bounds for a while, I tried jumping down into the trash below, but it just slid me off the side of the map to my demise. And with that grueling fall, we've cleared Henry's chase and reached the end of today's video. We'll be be tackling the second half of the game real soon, so subscribe now, and I'll see you all very shortly. Cheers!